On the morning of November 16th, 1959, a mailman named Robert Dalton drove up the dirt road leading to the Patterson farm outside Hollis, Kansas. He had a package to deliver. It was a Monday. The sky was overcast. The temperature was near freezing. Robert had been delivering mail in this area for 12 years. He knew most of the families along his route. He knew their schedules. He knew their habits. The Patterson family was always home on Monday mornings. Clara Patterson usually came to the door when he knocked. She would thank him. She would ask about his family. She was kind. When he reached the house, he noticed the front door was open. This was not unusual. The Patterson family never locked their doors. Robert had mentioned this to them several times over the years. He had told Herbert Patterson that it was not safe to leave doors unlocked, even in a rural area. Herbert had always smiled and said they had nothing to worry about. He said they lived in a good place. He said people looked out for each other. Robert had stopped bringing it up. Robert parked his truck near the porch and got out. He carried the package. It was addressed to Clara Patterson. It felt light, probably fabric or thread. Clara often ordered sewing supplies. Robert walked onto the porch. The wood creaked under his feet. He knocked on the door frame. No one answered. He knocked again. Still no response. He called out. He said Mrs. Patterson's name. Nothing. He hesitated. He looked through the open door into the living room. He saw overturned furniture, a broken lamp, papers scattered on the floor. He felt a sudden tightness in his chest. Robert stepped inside. He called out again. His voice was louder now. No answer. The house was quiet. Too quiet. He walked slowly through the living room. He noticed a chair tipped over, a rug bunched up against the wall. He moved toward the kitchen. The door was half open. He pushed it with his hand. It swung inward. He saw blood on the floor. A large pool of it. Dark red. Almost black. He saw a woman's hand. He stopped breathing for a moment. He turned and ran back to his truck. He drove as fast as he could to the nearest farmhouse. He pounded on the door. A man answered. Robert told him to call the sheriff. He said something terrible had happened at the Patterson place. 2 deputies arrived within 40 minutes. They were accompanied by Sheriff John Harmon. The sheriff had known the Patterson family for years. He had gone to school with Herbert. They had played baseball together as boys. When the call came in, he had hoped it was a mistake. He had hoped Robert Dalton had overreacted. But when he walked into the house and saw the living room, he knew it was not a mistake. The deputies entered with caution. They moved through the living room and into the hallway. The sheriff stayed behind them. They found the first body in the kitchen. It was Clara Patterson. She was lying face down near the sink. Her hands had been bound behind her, back with rope. The rope had cut into her wrists. There was blood around her head and torso. Her nightgown was torn. One of the deputies checked for a pulse. There was none. The sheriff looked away. He told the deputies to continue searching the house. They moved down the hallway. The first bedroom on the left was empty. The bed was made. The room was neat. They continued to the back bedroom. The door was closed. One deputy opened it slowly. Inside, they found 3 more bodies. Herbert Patterson was on the floor near the bed. He was on his back. His hands were bound in front of him. His chest and abdomen were covered in blood. There were multiple wounds. The bed was soaked with blood. On the bed were the 2 children. Mary Patterson was on the left side. Daniel Patterson was on the right. Both were bound. Both had been stabbed. The scene suggested a prolonged and violent attack. The deputy who opened the door stepped back into the hallway. He leaned against the wall. He closed his eyes. The sheriff called for additional assistance. The Patterson farm was located approximately 8 miles outside Hollis, a small town in western Kansas with a population of just under 1,500 people. The property consisted of 120 acres of wheat fields and pasture. The house sat at the end of a long driveway surrounded by open land. There were no close neighbors. The nearest house belonged to a family named Garrett, and it was more than 2 miles away. The Pattersons had lived on the farm since 1952, when Herbert had purchased it with money inherited from his father. Herbert Patterson was 40 years old. He had been born in Hollis in 1919. He had grown up during the Depression. His family had been poor, but hard-working. Herbert had left school after the 8th grade to help his father on their farm. He had worked as a hired hand for various farmers throughout the 1930s and 1940s. In 1951, his father passed away and left him a modest sum of money. Herbert used it to buy the farm. It was the first property he had ever owned. He was proud of it. Herbert grew wheat primarily. He also raised a small number of cattle and chickens. The farm was not large, but it provided enough income to support his family. He worked long hours. He was up before dawn most days. He repaired his own equipment. He did not hire help except during harvest season. People in town described him as a quiet and decent man. He kept his word. He paid his debts. He attended church regularly at the First Baptist Church in Hollis. He helped neighbors when they needed assistance with repairs or heavy work. He did not drink. He did not gamble. He was not wealthy, but he was respected. His wife, Clara Patterson, was also 40 years old. She had been born Clara Simmons in a town 30 miles south of Hollis. She had grown up in a large family with 6 siblings. Her father had worked for the railroad. Her mother had taken in laundry to make extra money. Clara had completed high school, which was unusual for women of her generation in that area. She had worked briefly as a clerk in a general store before meeting Herbert at a church social in 1943. They married the following year. Clara had wanted to continue working, but Herbert preferred that she stay home. She agreed without argument. Clara managed the household. She cooked. She cleaned. She canned vegetables from their garden every summer. She sewed most of the family's clothes. She kept detailed household accounts. She knew exactly how much money they had and where it needed to go. Neighbors who knew her described her as kind and soft-spoken. She never raised her voice. She never complained. She was active in the church. She organized bake sales and helped with Sunday school. She volunteered at school events when her children needed her. She did not gossip. She did not judge others. People liked her. The Pattersons had 2 children. Their daughter, Mary, was 15 years old. She had been born in Ninyashise, 1944, shortly after Herbert returned from a brief stint working in a factory during the war. Mary was a sophomore at Hollis High School. She rode the bus to school every morning. It was a 40-minute ride. Teachers described her as a good student. She earned mostly B's with occasional A's. She was polite and quiet in class. She did not cause trouble. She had a few close friends, mostly girls from church. She helped her mother with chores after school. She washed dishes. She helped with laundry. She watched her younger brother when needed. She did not complain about the work. Their son, Daniel, was 12 years old. He had been born in 1947. He attended Hollis Middle School. He was in the 7th grade. Teachers described him as shy but intelligent. He enjoyed reading. He borrowed books from the school library every week. He liked adventure stories and books about animals. He helped his father with farm work on weekends and after school. He fed the chickens. He helped mend fences. He was learning to drive the tractor. He was small for his age, but strong. His classmates liked him. He did not get into fights. He did not talk back to teachers. The family was close. They ate dinner together every evening at 6 o'clock. Clara always prepared a hot meal. They said grace before eating. They talked about their days. Herbert would tell them about the farm. Mary would talk about school. Daniel would share something he had read. After dinner, they would listen to the radio together or read. On Sundays, they attended church in the morning and evening services. They did not travel often. They had visited relatives in Missouri once or twice. They had never left Kansas. They lived simply. They were content. Neighbors later stated that the Pattersons seemed happy. One woman who knew Clara from church said the family appeared devoted to each other. She said Herbert always spoke kindly about his wife and children. She said Clara often mentioned how proud she was of Mary and Daniel. She said she could not imagine anyone wanting to harm them. Another neighbor said Herbert had helped him repair a barn roof the previous summer. He said Herbert had worked for 2 full days without asking for payment. He said Herbert had refused money when it was offered. He said Herbert was a good man. One detail about the Patterson family was frequently mentioned by those who knew them. They never locked their doors. The front door, the back door, the barn, the shed. None of them were ever locked. This was not common even in rural Kansas. Most families locked their doors at night, especially if they lived far from town. But the Pattersons did not. Herbert Patterson believed that locking doors was unnecessary. He had grown up in a time and place where people trusted each other. He said they lived in a safe area. He said they had nothing worth stealing. He said he trusted people. He said if someone needed help, he wanted them to be able to come inside. Clara shared this belief. She said they had never had a problem. She said she did not see a reason to start locking doors now. She said it would feel like they were afraid, and she did not want to live that way. Friends and neighbors had mentioned this habit over the years. Some found it admirable. They said it showed faith in humanity. Others thought it was unwise. They said times were changing. They said even good people needed to be careful. The Pattersons listened politely, but did not change their ways. Herbert would say that if someone wanted to harm them, a lock would not stop them. He said he would rather trust people and be wrong than live in fear and be right. On the evening of November 15th, 1959, the Patterson family had attended the evening service at First Baptist Church in Hollis. The service began at 6:30 and ended around 8 o'clock. Several people saw them there. They sat in their usual pew, 4th row from the front on the right side. Herbert wore a dark suit. Clara wore a blue dress. Mary wore a skirt and sweater. Daniel wore slacks and a button-up shirt. They sang hymns. They bowed their heads during prayer. After the service, they spoke briefly with the pastor, Reverend Thomas Grant. Reverend Grant later recalled the conversation. He said Herbert mentioned that the wheat harvest had been good that year. He said Herbert seemed pleased. He said Clara asked about the pastor's wife, who had been ill. The pastor said she was recovering. He thanked Clara for her concern. Mary and Daniel stood quietly beside their parents. The pastor asked Daniel if he was enjoying school. Daniel said yes. The pastor said he was glad. They shook hands. Herbert said they would see him next Sunday. The pastor said he looked forward to it. The family walked to their truck and drove away. A neighbor, a man named Thomas Riley, saw their truck pass his house around 8:30 that evening. Thomas lived about a mile from the Patterson farm. He was standing on his porch smoking a off cigarette when he saw the headlights. He recognized the truck. He waved. Herbert waved back. Thomas said later that everything appeared normal. He said there was nothing unusual about their behavior. He said he went inside shortly after and went to bed. He said he heard nothing unusual during the night. The family arrived home shortly after 8:30. It is believed they followed their usual routine. Clara would have prepared a light meal or snack, perhaps soup or sandwiches. The children would have changed out of their church clothes. They may have done some homework or read before bed. Herbert would have checked on the livestock. He would have walked out to the barn to make sure the cattle had water and the chickens were secure. He would have returned to the house. They would have gathered in the living room for a short time. Then they would have gone to bed. The doors would have remained unlocked. Investigators later determined that the attack occurred between midnight and 3 in the morning on November 16th. The evidence suggested that at least 2 individuals entered the house through the front door. The door had been unlocked. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged locks. The intruders had simply walked in. They moved quietly through the living room. They knew where they were going. They went directly to the bedroom where Herbert and Clara were sleeping. The bedroom was at the end of the hallway. The door was closed, but not locked. The intruders opened it. They woke Herbert and Clara. It is not known exactly what was said. It is believed the intruders threatened them with a weapon. They forced them out of bed. They tied Herbert's hands in front of him with rope. They tied Clara's hands behind her back. They brought them to the kitchen. The children were woken next. Mary and Daniel shared the back bedroom. They slept in separate beds. The intruders went to their room. They woke them. They tied their hands. They brought them to the back bedroom where they had been sleeping. It is believed the intruders kept the family separated to prevent them from helping each other. What happened after that is based on physical evidence and the condition of the bodies. The attack was brutal. Herbert Patterson was stabbed 17 times. The wounds were concentrated in his chest and abdomen. Several wounds penetrated vital organs. The medical examiner determined that he would have bled to death within minutes. But the attack continued even after the fatal wounds were inflicted. There were defensive wounds on his hands and forearms. He had tried to protect himself. The bindings on his wrists showed that he had struggled. The rope had cut deeply into his skin. Clara Patterson was stabbed 14 times. The wounds were in her chest, back, and neck. She had been stabbed while lying face down on the kitchen floor. There were no defensive wounds on her hands. It is believed she was incapacitated quickly. The medical examiner noted that one wound to her neck would have been fatal. The other wounds were inflicted after she was likely already dying or dead. Mary Patterson was stabbed 9 times. The wounds were in her chest and abdomen. She had been on the bed when she was attacked. There were defensive wounds on her hands. She had tried to fight. The bindings on her wrists were tight. She had struggled against them. The medical examiner noted bruising around her wrists, consistent with prolonged restraint. She had been alive and struggling for some time before she was killed. Daniel Patterson was stabbed 12 times. The wounds were in his chest, abdomen, and throat. He had also been on the bed. There were defensive wounds on his hands and arms. He had tried to protect himself. The medical examiner noted that Daniel was small for his age. He would not have been able to fight off an adult attacker. The wounds suggested he had been stabbed repeatedly even after he stopped moving. The medical examiner determined that all 4 victims had suffered for some time before dying. None of the deaths were instantaneous. The family had been conscious and aware during at least part of the attack. The examiner noted that this level of violence was excessive. The victims had been restrained. They posed no threat. The number and nature of the wounds suggested rage or panic or both. The house showed signs of a search. Drawers had been opened, closets had been checked, a small metal box that Herbert kept on a shelf in the bedroom had been forced open. It had contained approximately $60 in cash. The money was gone. Clara's jewelry box, which sat on the dresser, had been emptied. The jewelry was inexpensive. Costume pieces, a few silver bracelets, a string of pearls that Herbert had given her for their 10th anniversary. Nothing of significant value. The intruders had taken it anyway. The rest of the house had been left relatively undisturbed. The kitchen cabinets had not been opened. The pantry had not been searched. It appeared the intruders had known where to look or had searched only the bedrooms. Investigators found no signs of forced entry. The front door had been unlocked. The back door had been unlocked. There were no broken windows, no damaged locks, no scratches or tool marks around the door frames. The intruders had simply walked in. They had walked through the house. They had murdered a family. They had taken a small amount of money and some worthless jewelry. Then they had walked out. Footprints were found in the dirt outside the front door. The ground was partially frozen, but the prints were visible. They suggested two individuals. Both wore boots. The prints led from the porch to the driveway. They then disappeared on the gravel road leading away from the property. Investigators followed the road for half a mile. They found no additional evidence. No tire tracks, no discarded items, nothing. The investigation moved quickly. Authorities interviewed neighbors within a 10-mile radius. They asked if anyone had seen strangers in the area. They asked if anyone had noticed unfamiliar vehicles. They asked if anyone had heard anything unusual during the night. Most people had seen nothing. Most had heard nothing. The Garretts, who lived closest to the Patterson farm, said they had gone to bed early that night. They said they heard nothing unusual. They said they were shocked when they heard what had happened. One neighbor, a farmer named Carl Benson, said he had been driving home late on the night of November 15th. He said he had been visiting his brother in the next county. He said he passed the Patterson farm around 11:30. He said he noticed the lights were off in the house. He said this was normal. He said he did not see any other vehicles on the road. He said he did not see anything suspicious. Authorities reviewed recent crimes in the area. There had been a series of small burglaries in surrounding counties over the past 6 months. Homes had been broken into. Small amounts of cash and items had been stolen. None of the burglaries had involved violence. None had occurred in Hollis. Investigators wondered if there might be a connection. They contacted law enforcement in neighboring counties. They shared information. They found no clear link. They checked for any individuals who had shown unusual interest in the Patterson family. They interviewed people in town. They asked if anyone had asked questions about the Pattersons. They asked if anyone had been seen watching the farm. They found nothing. The Pattersons had no known enemies. They had no disputes with neighbors. They owed no debts. Herbert had no conflicts at church. Clara had no disagreements with other women. The children had no trouble at school. There was no apparent motive beyond robbery. Investigators interviewed Herbert's co-workers from years past. They interviewed Clara's friends from church. They interviewed the children's teachers and classmates. Everyone said the same thing. The Pattersons were good people. They were kind. They were honest. They did not cause problems. No one could think of anyone who would want to harm them. The investigation seemed to stall. A break in the case came 3 days later. A man named Eugene Hickok was arrested in a town outside Kansas City, Missouri, for attempting to cash a stolen check. The check had been taken during a burglary 2 weeks earlier. Hickok was brought in for questioning. During the interview, he mentioned that he had recently been traveling through Kansas with another man. The other man's name was Perry Lowell. The detective conducting the interview noted the names. He ran them through the system. Eugene Hickok was 31 years old. He had been born in Oklahoma. He had a criminal record dating back to his teenage years: burglary, theft, assault. He had served time in prison in Oklahoma and Kansas. He had been released from the Kansas State Penitentiary in March 1959, 8 months before the murders. He had been incarcerated for burglary and receiving stolen property. While in prison, he had met Perry Lowell. Perry Lowell was 28 years old. He had been born in Texas. He had a more violent criminal history than Hickok. He had been convicted of assault with a deadly weapon in 1954. He had served 4 years. He had been released in early 1959. He and Hickok had become friends in prison. They had been cellmates for 6 months. After their release, they had stayed in contact. They had traveled together. They had committed crimes together. Authorities ran both names through missing persons and unsolved crime databases. They found that Hickok and Lowell had been in Kansas in mid-November. A gas station attendant in Liberal, Kansas, a town about 60 miles from Hollis, reported seeing 2 men matching their descriptions on November 14th. The men had purchased gas and cigarettes. They had paid in cash. They had asked for directions to Hollis. The attendant remembered them because one of the men had been rude. Hickok was questioned further. Initially, he denied being in the Hollis area. When confronted with the gas station attendant's statement, he changed his story. He admitted that he and Lowell had been in Kansas. He said they were just passing through. He said they were looking for work. When asked if they had stopped at any farms, he hesitated. Then he said they may have stopped at 1 or 2 places to ask if anyone needed help with harvest or repairs. When asked which farms, he said he could not remember. The detective pressed him. Hickok said they might have stopped at a farm outside Hollis. He said he did not remember the name. The detective asked if they had gone inside any of the houses. Hickok said no. The detective did not believe him. He showed Hickok a photograph of the Patterson house. He asked if Hickok recognized it. Hickok stared at the photograph. He said he might have seen it. The detective asked if he and Lowell had been inside. Hickok said no. The detective said they had evidence that placed them at the scene. This was not entirely true, but it was enough. Hickok became nervous. He said he wanted a lawyer. Perry Lowell was arrested in Tulsa, Oklahoma 2 days later. He was working at a construction site under a false name. When police arrived, he did not resist. He was brought back to Kansas for questioning. He was more cooperative than Hickok. He seemed resigned. He knew it was over. Lowell said he and Hickok had been driving through Kansas looking for opportunities. He said they were low on money. He said Hickok had told him about a farm family that supposedly kept a safe full of cash in their house. Hickok claimed he had heard about it from someone in prison. The man had worked on farms in that area years ago. He had said one family kept thousands of dollars hidden in their house because they did not trust banks. Hickok had remembered the story. He had decided they should check it out. Lowell said they drove to Hollis. They asked around town casually. They did not mention the Patterson family by name. They asked if there were any large farms in the area. Someone directed them west. They drove out toward the Patterson farm on November 15th. They parked the car on a side road about a mile away. They walked to the farm. They watched the house from a distance. They saw the family leave in their truck. They assumed they were going to church. They waited for them to return. After the family went inside, Hickok and Lowell waited several more hours. They wanted to make sure everyone was asleep. Around midnight, they approached the house. Lowell said the front door was unlocked. He said they were surprised. Hickok said it made things easier. They went inside. Lowell said they had not planned to kill anyone. He said they were only going to tie up the family and search the house for the safe. He said they went to the bedroom where the parents were sleeping. He said Hickok woke them with a knife. He said he told them not to make noise. He said Herbert Patterson asked what they wanted. Hickok said they wanted the money. Herbert said there was no safe. Hickok did not believe him. He became angry. Lowell said they tied up Herbert and Clara. They brought them to the kitchen. Hickok demanded to know where the safe was. Herbert kept saying there was no safe. Hickok searched the bedroom. He found the metal box. He opened it. There was only $60 inside. Hickok was furious. He felt cheated. He had expected thousands. He had driven all this way for $60. Lowell said Hickok went back to the kitchen. He said Hickok started yelling at Herbert. He said Herbert tried to calm him down. He said Herbert offered him the money. He said Herbert said they could take whatever they wanted. Hickok said it was not enough. Lowell said things escalated. He said Herbert tried to stand up. He said Hickok stabbed him. Clara screamed. Hickok stabbed her too. Lowell said he panicked. He said Hickok told him to take care of the children. Lowell said he did not want to. He said Hickok threatened him. He said Hickok said if he did not help, he would kill him too. Lowell said he went to the back bedroom. He said the children were awake. They were terrified. They were tied up on the bed. He said the girl was crying quietly. He said the boy was staring at him. Lowell said he did not look at their faces. He said he just did what Hickok told him to do. Lowell said after it was over, they searched the rest of the house quickly. They took the money. They took the jewelry. They left through the front door. They walked back to their car. They drove away. Lowell said they did not talk about it. He said they split the money, $30 each. He said they went their separate ways the next day. He said he tried not to think about it. He said he could not stop thinking about it. Hickok's account was different. He admitted they had gone to the Patterson farm. He admitted they had gone inside. But he said Lowell was lying about who did the killing. Hickok said Lowell had been the one who brought the knife. He said Lowell had been the one who suggested robbing the farm. He said when Herbert Patterson said there was no safe, Lowell became violent. Hickok said he tried to stop him, but Lowell was out of control. Hickok said Lowell stabbed Herbert first, then Clara. Then he went after the children. Hickok said he was just there. He said he did not participate. He said he did not touch the knife. The physical evidence did not conclusively support either version. Blood was found on clothing belonging to both men. The clothing had been recovered from their respective locations when they were arrested. Forensic analysis showed that both men had type O blood. 3 of the 4 victims also had type O blood. This made it impossible to determine whose blood was on whose clothing. Definitively, the knife was never recovered. Both men claimed the other had disposed of it. Fingerprints were found in the Patterson house that matched both Hickok and Lowell. Both had been in the house. Both had touched surfaces. Both had been present during the murders. Investigators believed that both men were responsible. They believed both had participated in the killings. The nature of the wounds suggested multiple attackers. The victims had been stabbed from different angles. The attacks had occurred in different rooms at roughly the same time. It was unlikely that one person could have killed all 4 family members alone, while the other did nothing. Both men were charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The trial took place in the spring of 1960. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented evidence recovered from the crime scene. They presented testimony from investigators. They presented forensic analysis of the blood, fingerprints, and other physical evidence. They presented Lowell's confession. They presented testimony from the gas station attendant who had seen the men. They presented testimony from people in Hollis who had seen strangers in the area around the time of the murders. They presented photographs of the crime scene. The photographs were graphic. Several jurors looked away. The defense argued that the confessions were coerced. They argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial. They said there was no proof that their clients had committed the murders. They said the prosecution had not established a clear motive. They said the timeline was uncertain. They called character witnesses who testified that both men were capable of reform. They said both men had difficult childhoods. They said they deserved a second chance. The prosecution countered that the evidence was overwhelming. They said both men had extensive criminal histories. They said the Patterson family had deserved a chance too. They said that chance had been taken from them. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found both men guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced both to death. Neither man showed emotion when the sentence was read. Their attorneys filed appeals. The appeals were denied. Both men were scheduled for execution. Eugene Hickok was executed by hanging on December 18, 1960. He was given the opportunity to make a final statement. He declined. He was asked if he wanted to see a chaplain. He said no. He did not request any visitors. He did not request a final meal. The execution was carried out at the Kansas State Penitentiary at 6 in the morning. A small number of officials were present. No family members attended. No journalists were allowed inside. The warden confirmed that Hickok was pronounced dead at 6:14. A brief notice appeared in the Hollis newspaper the following day. It listed his name, his age, and the fact of his execution. It did not provide details of his crimes. Most people in Hollis did not read it. They already knew. Perry Lowell was executed 1 month later on January 22, 1961. Unlike Hickok, Lowell requested to make a statement. He stood on the gallows. He looked at the witnesses. He said he was sorry. He said he wished he could take it back. He said he thought about the Patterson family every day. He said he knew he deserved to die. He said he hoped his death would bring some peace. The rope was placed around his neck. The trapdoor opened. Lowell was pronounced dead at 6:11. His body was buried in the prison cemetery. No one claimed it. The Patterson farm was sold in 1961. The family who purchased it did not want the house. It held too much pain, too much history. The house was torn down in the summer of 1961. The barn was left standing for a few more years, but it eventually collapsed from neglect. The land was purchased by a neighboring farmer named William Hayes. He incorporated it into his own property. He planted wheat on it. The site where the house stood is now part of a larger wheat field. There is no marker, no memorial, nothing to indicate what happened there. In the town of Hollis, the case is still remembered by those who were alive in 1959. Most prefer not to discuss it. The younger generation knows little about it. It is not taught in schools. It is not mentioned in town histories. But those who remember say they will never forget. They say it changed the town. They say people started locking their doors after that. They say the sense of safety was gone. A small plaque was placed in the First Baptist Church in 1960. It is mounted on the wall near the entrance. It lists 4 names: Herbert Patterson, Clara Patterson, Mary Patterson, Daniel Patterson. Below the names, it says, "Taken from us November 16, 1959, forever in our hearts." The plaque does not provide details. Most people who attend the church now do not know the story. They see the plaque, they do not ask. One woman who had known Clara Patterson still lives in Hollis. Her name is Dorothy Miller. She is 93 years old. She lives in a small house on the same street where she grew up. She remembers Clara. She remembers the whole family. She said she visited the farm once in the summer of 1958. She said Clara had invited her for tea. They sat on the porch. They talked about their children. They talked about the garden. Dorothy said Clara had seemed happy. She said Clara mentioned that people often told her to lock her doors. Dorothy said Clara had smiled and said she saw no reason to live in fear. She said Clara believed people were good. Dorothy said she understood. She said she agreed at the time. She said she wishes Clara had been wrong. She said she wishes Clara had locked her doors that night. She said she thinks about it often. She said she wonders if it would have made a difference. She said probably not. She said it still bothers her. The pastor of First Baptist Church in 1959 was Reverend Thomas Grant. He retired in 1975. He moved to Colorado to be near his daughter. He passed away in 1989. Before he died, he gave one interview about the Patterson family. He said he spoke to Herbert Patterson the night before the murders. He said Herbert had seemed content. He said Herbert mentioned that the harvest had been good. He said Herbert thanked him for the service. He said Herbert shook his hand firmly. He said Herbert told him he would see him next Sunday. The Reverend paused. He said Herbert never made it. He said he conducted the funeral service 6 days later. He said it was the hardest thing he ever had to do. He said the church was full. He said people stood in the aisles. He said everyone wept. He said he still thinks about that family. He said he prays for them. He said he prays they found peace. A teacher who had taught Mary Patterson at Hollis High School said Mary had turned in an essay the week before she died. The essay was about her future. Mary wrote that she wanted to stay in Kansas after graduation. She wanted to help her parents on the farm. She wanted to get married and have children. She wanted to live a simple, quiet life. The teacher said she had given Mary an A on the essay. She said Mary had been so pleased. She said Mary had smiled when she got it back. She said Mary had said thank you. The teacher said she kept the essay. She said she could not bring herself to throw it away. She said she still has it in a box in her attic. She said she has read it many times over the years. She said it breaks her heart every time. A classmate of Daniel Patterson said Daniel had invited him to visit the farm the weekend after November 15th. The classmate's name was Jimmy Norton. He said he and Daniel had been friends. He said they sat together at lunch. He said Daniel had asked if he wanted to come see the farm. He said he wanted to show him the new calf that had been born. Jimmy said he had been excited. He said his mother had given him permission to go. He said he was supposed to ride the bus home with Daniel on Friday. But Friday never came. Jimmy said when he heard what happened, he did not believe it at first. He said he thought it was a mistake. He said when he realized it was true, he cried for days. He said he still thinks about Daniel. He said he wonders what would have happened if he had been there that night. He said he is grateful he was not. He said he feels guilty for feeling grateful. He said he cannot help it. The case files are stored in the basement of the county courthouse in Hollis. They are kept in a locked cabinet. Photographs from the crime scene are sealed in a separate envelope. Access to the files is restricted. Researchers must apply for permission and provide a valid reason. Very few requests are made. Most people do not want to see those photographs. Investigators who worked the case rarely spoke about it publicly after the trial. One retired deputy, a man named Samuel Cross, gave a brief interview in 1985. He said it was the worst scene he had ever witnessed in 30 years of law enforcement. He said the violence was excessive and unnecessary. He said the victims had been helpless. He said it was clear they had suffered. He said he was relieved when Hickok and Lowell were caught. He said he was relieved when they were executed. He said justice was served. He said it did not bring the family back. He said nothing could bring them back. He said he still dreams about that house sometimes. He said he still sees their faces. 4 people died in that house on the night of November 15th, 1959. Herbert Patterson, Clara Patterson, Mary Patterson, Daniel Patterson. They were killed by 2 men they had never met. The men had no personal connection to them. The men had no reason to hate them. They had simply heard a rumor about money. They had heard the doors were never locked. They had walked in. They had murdered a family. They had taken $60 and some cheap jewelry. Then they had walked out. The case is closed. The men are dead. The family is gone. The house is gone. The land remains. It grows wheat every year. The wheat is harvested in the summer. It is sold. It feeds people. The land does not remember. The land does not care. People drive past it without knowing. Some of them are new to the area. They do not know the history. Others have lived in Hollis their whole lives. They know. They do not talk about it. There are no questions left about what happened. The facts are clear. 2 men entered a house. They killed 4 people. They were caught. They were executed. The case is closed. But people still lock their doors in Hollis. They still check the windows before bed. They still feel afraid sometimes, even though decades have passed. Because they learned something that night in November 1959. They learned that evil does not need a reason. It does not need a motive. It does not need to know you. It only needs an opportunity. And the doors were open.